How could you betray me like this?
Davina, it's not what you think.
Don't, honey, let her go.
That's my wife you're talking about.
She finds the hotel keycard on a Tuesday. Not the cheating, not yet. Just a small, white rectangle that falls from the breast pocket of his suit jacket when she picks it up from the back of a chair. The only thing he ever leaves within reach of her. Because suits don't have feelings, suits can't flinch when she walks into the room. And she stares at it. Grand Hyatt Seoul, room 2214, and something cold moves through her chest. Slow and indeliberate, the way ice forms not all at once, but creeping from the edges in. And Davina Kingsley Hahn, 3 years married, 3 years untouched, 3 years wondering what she did wrong, closes her fist around that card and feels, for the first time in a long time, something other than numb. She feels afraid of what she's about to find out. She feels the specific terror of a woman who already knows the answer, but hasn't yet let herself know it. She is 29 years old, and she has been a ghost in her own marriage, moving through a penthouse that costs more than her parents' entire neighborhood, and now she is standing in a cloud of his cologne. Cedar and dark amber. The smell she used to press her face toward in the first weeks before she learned not to. Holding proof. Just the beginning of proof. But proof enough. Welcome to K-Mafia Romance Stories, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The beginning, the way Davina tells it later, when she can tell it at all, when the words don't stick in her throat like something she swallowed wrong. The beginning was a boardroom. Not romantic, not cinematic. A boardroom in the Gangnam district of Seoul with floor-to-ceiling glass and a view of the city that looked, on clear days, like something painted specifically to humble you. And Davina had walked in representing Kingsley Architecture Group, London's third largest independent firm, carrying 3 years of her own work in a presentation that she had rebuilt from scratch twice. Because she refused to submit anything less than extraordinary. She had not known that Han Seo-jun owned the building she was pitching to redesign. She had not known when she walked in and the room went quiet in that particular way. Rooms sometimes go quiet, not because something bad was about to happen, but because something was shifting in the air, some molecular rearrangement that the body registers before the mind catches up. That the silence was because of the man at the head of the table who had looked up from whatever he was reading and simply stopped. She had known he was powerful. Han Group's reach covered shipping, pharmaceuticals, luxury real estate, and 2 subsidiary tech companies that between them employed more people than some small countries. Han Seo-jun had built that empire from a foundation his father left him that was already formidable, and then exceeded it by the age of 32, in ways that made financial journalists run out of superlatives. He was 34 when she walked into that boardroom. He was the kind of man who arrived in rooms before he entered them, his reputation preceding him and by enough distance that people adjusted their posture when they heard his name. What she had not known was what he looked like. No photograph, she would think later, had ever done justice to the problem of Han Seo-jun in person. He was not pretty. Prettiness was too soft a word, too decorative. He was severe in the way that very beautiful and very cold things are severe. High cheekbones that threw precise shadows in the late afternoon light. A jaw that looked as though it had been drawn by someone who believed architecture was the highest art form. Eyes so dark they absorbed light rather than reflecting it. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost what Davina made in a month and wore it like armor. Completely natural, completely impenetrable. He had looked at her. She had felt it in places that had no business being involved in a professional pitch. She had given the best presentation of her career anyway, because Davina Kingsley did not let inconvenient physical reactions derail her professional life. And when she finished, and the room was quiet again, a different quality of quiet this time, impressed rather than arrested, Han Seo-jun had said, in English so precise, it had a slight British edge to it from wherever he'd studied. You designed the Meridian Tower in London. It wasn't a question. Yes, she said. I've been inside it, he said. The way the light moves in the atrium at noon is unlike anything I've seen in modern construction. She had waited. You understand, he said, that I don't give compliments I don't mean. I'd assumed, she said, that you give very few at all. Something had happened in his eyes then. Something quick and unguarded that was gone before she could name it, like a light switched off behind a window. You're right, he said. The contract is yours, Miss Kingsley. He had asked her to dinner that night, through his assistant, a message delivered with the careful neutrality of someone who had learned to present Han Seo-jun's decisions as inevitabilities rather than requests. Mr. Han would like to discuss the scope of the project over dinner. 8 o'clock. Gyungsik. She had gone. She had told herself it was professional. Over the course of 6 months, she had told herself that several more times, with decreasing conviction, while Seo-jun appeared at her firm's satellite Seoul office with espresso she hadn't asked for, but always needed, while he stood beside her on construction sites in the wind with his jacket somehow still immaculate, while he argued with her about load-bearing aesthetics with the focused intensity of a man who genuinely cared about the answer, not about winning, about the answer. And while she had slowly, helplessly, begun to care about the specific gravity of his attention in a way that made her careful with herself. The proposal, when it came, was not a proposal the way proposals happen in films. They had been standing on the unfinished roof of the Han Group tower she was redesigning, 12 stories above Gangnam, the city spread below them in its impossible complexity. And he had said, without looking at her, I need to discuss something that has nothing to do with the building. She had waited. My grandfather, he said, has given me 6 months to produce a marriage or produce a reason why he should transfer control of the Singapore and Tokyo holdings to my cousin instead of me. He paused. My grandfather is 78 and has never in his life accepted a reason that was not a result. Seo-jun, I'm not asking you to love me, he said. Then quieter. I'm asking you to consider a contract. 2 years? Possibly 3. You would have full access to my firm's resources. The Singapore expansion project would be yours to design. Your career would be... Stop, her voice came out steadier than she felt. Stop listing what I'd get. He stopped. Why me? She said. He was quiet for a long time, and the city moved below them, indifferent and enormous. Because, he said finally, you are the only person I have met in a very long time who does not want anything from me. She had stood there and felt the terrible accuracy of that, and felt also, underneath it, beneath her pride and her perfectly reasonable objection to being a corporate transaction, the unbearable pull of wanting to be close to him in whatever form was available. She had said yes. She had told herself it was the career opportunity. The apartment, penthouse, she corrected herself, because calling it an apartment was like calling the Han Group a small business, was everything that Seo-jun was, precise, controlled, expensive in a way that didn't announce itself, beautiful in a way that felt intentional rather than warm, floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, art that she recognized and respected, a kitchen that functioned as set dressing because they ate separately, at different times, in the way of 2 people who have been given the shape of a life together without the substance. He was not cruel. That was the thing she held on to in the first months, the thing she pressed against when the loneliness became its own physical weight. He was not cruel. He was simply absent, present in body, unreachable in every way that mattered. He came home late and left early and moved through the penthouse with the quiet efficiency of someone living alone, so careful not to disturb her space, that he somehow made her feel like she was the intruder in his life rather than the woman he had married. They had an agreement about appearances, dinners, events, the quarterly Han family gathering where his grandmother touched Davina's hand with papery warmth and his grandfather watched her from across the table with assessing eyes that she met directly. Because Davina Kingsley did not flinch from assessments. In public, Seo-jun was different. Not warm, exactly, but present. His hand at the small of her back, during receptions, light but deliberate. The way he tracked her across a room without appearing to. Once, at a charity gala, a man from the French embassy had held her hand too long during an introduction, and Seo-jun had materialized at her shoulder with the smooth inevitability of weather. His hand closing over hers in the man's grip with gentle, absolute precision. And the French diplomat had released her with a speed that suggested he understood exactly how many ways Han Seo-jun could make his professional life complicated. She had not said anything about it afterward. He had not said anything about it either. That was their language. The language of things not said. At home, they were strangers who had learned each other's schedules. She knew he drank his coffee without sugar, that he worked until 2 a.m. on acquisitions he was troubled by, that he stood at the north-facing window on difficult days and looked at the city the way she looked at blueprints when something wasn't resolving. He knew, she assumed he knew, he noticed everything, that she sketched when she was anxious, that she ate standing up when she was working, that she cried exactly once in the kitchen at 3 a.m, 6 weeks into their marriage, quickly and efficiently, the way she did everything. She had not known he was awake. She had not known he had stood in the hallway for 45 seconds before she heard his footsteps retreat. She found out later, much later, after everything. The contract was supposed to be 2 years. At the 2-year mark, his grandfather had called them to the Han family estate in Gyeonggi-do, a property that sat on 20 acres of cultivated ground and contained more history than some museums. And over tea that tasted of ceremony and obligation, he had looked at Davina for a long moment and said, "1 more year." She had felt Seo-jun go still beside her on the floor cushion in the way that things go still before they break. She had said, pleasantly, "Of course." Driving back to Seoul, she had looked out the window and counted the reasons she should negotiate an exit. The contract had provisions for this. Her lawyer, her own, not the Han Group's, had insisted on clean exit clauses. She could leave with the Singapore project completed, her reputation enhanced, a settlement that would fund her firm's expansion for 5 years, and a story that was technically a divorce but practically just a business arrangement reaching its natural end. She had counted the reasons. She had not brought it up. She told herself it was because of the Busan project she'd just been offered. The timing was inconvenient. She needed Seoul access for another 14 months. She did not tell herself the truth, which was that somewhere in the past 2 years, between the professional arguments and the parallel silences and the specific, particular feeling of his hand at the small of her, back in rooms full of people who wanted something from him, she had fallen in love with her contractual husband, quietly, without permission, in the way that terrible things happen to careful people, while she was looking somewhere else. The 3rd year was different. She couldn't point to a day it changed. Just a slow accumulation of moments that felt like something shifting underneath the foundation. Small cracks that she was trained to notice in buildings but had missed in herself. He started coming home earlier. Not early. Seo-jun's relationship with time was still principally organized around work, but earlier than before. 9 instead of midnight. Sometimes 8:30. She would be at her drafting table or on the living room floor with blueprints spread around her, and she would hear his key in the lock, and something would happen in her chest that she categorized firmly as relief that she was not alone in the apartment and nothing else. He started asking about her projects, not the way people ask about things they're not interested in, the way you ask as social lubrication, expecting a short answer and already thinking of something else. He asked the way he argued with her about load-bearing aesthetics, focused, wanting the actual answer, turning what she said over in his hands like something he was considering from multiple angles. She had told him about the Busan Cultural Center Commission, and he had listened, really listened, sitting on the couch with his jacket off and his tie loosened and his eyes on her face. And then he had asked a question about the acoustic design that was so precisely right that she had stared at him. "What?" he said. "That's exactly the problem I'm trying to solve," she said. "How did you—" "I studied civil engineering for 2 years," he said, "before my father redirected me to business. He paused, something crossing his face that she couldn't read. "I was good at it." She had looked at him, this man she had lived beside for 2 years and 10 months without really seeing. "You miss it," she said. He didn't answer, which was, with Seo Jun, an answer. There were other moments. The evening she had a fever. Nothing serious. The kind that arrives without warning and makes the world feel slightly unreal. And she had been on the couch with a blanket when he came home and stopped in the doorway of the living room and looked at her with an expression she didn't have a name for. He had disappeared into the kitchen without a word. He had reappeared 20 minutes later with soup that tasted of ginger and something subtle and warming, set it on the coffee table in front of her, and then returned to his study. She had eaten the soup and thought, he made this from scratch, not ordered it, made it. She had been inside that kitchen enough times to know what it smelled like when someone was actually cooking. She had not said anything. He had not said anything. Their language. Their terrible, insufficient language. The night of the Han Group Charity Gala, the big one, in the spring of the 3rd year, the kind of event where every person in attendance was watching every other person in attendance for information they could use. She had worn a dress that she'd agonized over in the way she usually didn't agonize over things. A deep burgundy that she finally chose because it made her feel like the version of herself that she was proudest of rather than the version that was trying to impress someone else. Seojun had been waiting in the foyer when she came out of her room, already in his dinner jacket, checking something on his phone, and when she walked in, he had looked up and simply stopped looking at his phone, had put it in his pocket, had looked at her the way she imagined he looked at things he was in the process of deciding were important enough to memorize. "You look," he started. Her heart moved in a way that was inconvenient and real. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and whatever moment had been building closed over like water after a stone, smooth and immediate. "The car is ready," he said. "We should go." She followed him. She thought, "I am going to ruin my own life." She found the hotel key card on a Tuesday, and she did not do anything immediately because Davina Kingsley had not gotten to where she was by being impulsive. She set it back in his jacket pocket, heart doing something violent and controlled in her chest, and she went to her drafting table and she sat there for 2 hours and she did not sketch anything. Grand Hyatt Seoul, room 2214. There were explanations. She cataloged them methodically, the way she cataloged structural problems in buildings she was asked to assess. Business meeting, client entertainment. The Grand Hyatt was neutral ground for the kind of confidential negotiations that Han Group conducted regularly. She had no evidence of anything except a key card to a hotel that was 10 minutes from that penthouse. She slept very little. In the morning, she was already at her desk when he left. She heard the door, the particular sound of it, and she did not look up from her screen. She waited until his car had been gone for 20 minutes, and then she picked up her phone and called Jisoo, her assistant, and said, "I need you to check something for me. Grand Hyatt Seoul, the past 2 weeks. Corporate account usage under Han Group." Jisoo called back in 40 minutes. There was a quality to her silence before she spoke that told Davina everything. "There's a recurring room booking," Jisoo said. "Suite 2214. Every Thursday night. It's billed to a subsidiary account, not the main Han Group card. The name on the reservation is..." A pause. "Park Soo-yeon." Davina wrote the name down on paper. slowly in her precise architectural handwriting. "That's all," she said. "Thank you, Jisoo." She sat for a long time after the call. Park Soo-yeon. She knew that name. She had met that woman at exactly one Han Group event. A product launch 18 months ago. A woman in a white dress who had the kind of beauty that drew rooms and a way of looking at Seo-jun that Davina had noticed and then aggressively refused to think about. She worked in acquisition strategy, which meant she worked for him, which meant that whatever this was had been happening in the shadow of a professional relationship that was itself a shadow of whatever it had been before. The math was simple. She was an architect. She understood when something had been built on a foundation that was going to fail. Thursday was 3 days away. She went to the Grand Hyatt on Thursday at 7 in the evening. She had not told anyone. She had gone about her week with the specific self-control of someone who has decided to wait for evidence before acting on something that might destroy them, and she had waited. And now she stood in the lobby of the hotel in the gray coat she wore when she was trying to be invisible, and she watched the elevator panels, and she felt, underneath the careful control, something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. Something larger than both, the kind of feeling that precedes a version of yourself you haven't met yet. She took the elevator to the 22nd floor. She stood in the corridor outside room 2214 and listened to the quality of the silence behind the door for exactly 4 seconds. Then the door opened. Park Soo-yeon came out in silk and perfume and stopped when she saw Davina, and the expression that crossed her face was not guilt. Davina had been expecting guilt. It was something more complicated, something that looked, for a terrible fraction of a second, like grief. Behind her, Seo-jun appeared in the doorway. He was fully dressed, jacket on, phone in hand, a glass of water on the table behind him that she could see because the door swung wide with Park Soo-yeon's exit. Fully dressed and standing very still, watching Davina with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not guilt either, something that looked like no, like not like this, like I needed more time. But she had already seen enough. The hotel room, the woman, the booking in a name that wasn't his. 3 years of silence and distance, and a marriage that had been an arrangement from the start, and she had let herself feel things she was never supposed to feel. And she had been, what? A useful prop, a patient, convenient wife who asked nothing and expected less. "Davina?" Seo-jun said. "Don't," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. In the fractured, distant way, you can be proud of small things when large things are collapsing. She turned and walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She stood with her back to the corridor and listened to him say her name once more. Davina. In a voice she had never heard from him. Something raw and urgent and completely without the armor he wore everywhere, always. And she got into the elevator when it opened, and she pressed the lobby button, and she watched the doors close on the image of Han Seo-jun standing in a hotel corridor looking like something had been torn from him. She thought, good. She thought, I should have left 2 years ago. She thought, why does it feel like I'm the one bleeding? She went home. She packed a bag, efficiently, quickly, the way she did everything. And she was at the door with the bag in her hand and her passport and her laptop and the particular expression of a woman who has decided something irrevocable when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Seo-jun. She declined the call. She picked up her bag and she walked out of the Han Group penthouse for what she intended to be the last time. And the elevator carried her down 42 floors, and the night air hit her face on the street like something real and cold, and she stood there for a moment, just one moment, and she breathed. Then she got into a cab, gave Jisoo's address, and did not look back. Jisoo, who had been Davina's assistant for 4 years, and therefore knew her better than most people had time to, opened her apartment door, took one look at Davina's face, and said, "Come in, I'll make tea." She did not ask questions for 40 minutes, which was why Davina trusted her with the things she kept from everyone else. When the tea was in front of her, and the bag was in the corner, and Jisoo was sitting across from her with her feet tucked under her, and the particular focused patience she had when she was deciding Davina needed to say something rather than be told something, Davina said, "He's been seeing someone, Park Soo-yeon, every Thursday." Jisoo absorbed this. "You're sure?" "I saw her leave the room." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "He was inside." Jisoo was quiet for a moment, then, "What are you going to do?" "I've already done it," Davina said. "I left." She paused. "I need a hotel. Somewhere he won't look for me." "You can stay. Here. He'll know Jisoo's address?" "Davina?" Jisoo's voice had a note in it that made her look up. "You've been in love with him for a year and a half. I've watched you. I need you to be sure before you—" "Being in love with him," Davina said, "is exactly why I left." She met Jisoo's eyes. "I can't be in a room with him and feel nothing. So I can't be in a room with him." Jisoo studied her for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and booked a suite at the Signal under Jisoo's cousin's name. And Davina transferred there at midnight with her one bag and her laptop and the particular weight of a woman carrying more than luggage. Seo-jun called 11 times that night. She watched the calls come in from across the room, lying in a hotel bed that was nothing like the one in the penthouse, her phone on the dresser, glowing and buzzing with his name. At call 11, she got up, turned it face down, and lay back down in the dark. She thought about the way he had said her name in that corridor, the specific, broken quality of it. She thought about Park Soo-yeon's face, that expression that hadn't been guilt, something else, something she hadn't had the bandwidth to examine at the time. She told herself it didn't matter. What his face had done, what the other woman's face had done, what any of it meant beyond the facts. She had been, for 3 years, the perfect performance of a wife in a contractual marriage, and somewhere along the way, she had made the catastrophic error of making it real on her end without anyone asking her to, and the only thing left to do now was to exit cleanly and rebuild herself into the version that had walked into that boardroom 3 years ago, capable, solitary, needing nothing from anyone that she couldn't provide herself. She slept 3 hours. In the morning, she called her lawyer. Marcus Ose had handled her contracts since she was 24. And he had the voice of someone who had heard everything and been surprised by none of it. And he said, "Understood. I'll initiate the exit clause proceedings. You'll want to be clear on the timeline." "As fast as possible," she said. "There's the matter of the settlement review. The terms stipulate, I don't want the settlement." A pause on his end. She said, "I want the exit, just the exit. Tell them I'm waiving the financial terms." Silence. Then Marcus, carefully. "Davina, the settlement is considerable. There's no reason to—" "There is a reason," she said. "I need to leave this without owing him anything, including gratitude for a number with a lot of zeros." Another silence. Then, "I'll file the paperwork today." She hung up and sat on the edge of the Signal bed and looked at her hands. She had her work. She had the Busan Commission. She had 12 years of professional reputation that had nothing to do with Han Seo-jun. She was 29 years old and she was going to be fine. She was going to be absolutely fine. Her phone buzzed. Not a call. This time. A message. "I know you're not going to answer this. I need you to know that what you saw was not what you think it was. I am not asking you to believe me right now. I am asking you to give me one conversation before you do anything permanent. SJ." She read it twice. Then she put the phone down and went to shower, because she had a 10 o'clock call with the Busan Cultural Center Committee. And Davina Kingsley did not miss professional commitments because her personal life was disintegrating. She did not respond to the message. She did not respond to the 3 that followed it over the next 2 days, each one slightly more stripped than the last, the controlled precision of his language developing small fractures that she read with the part of her that could not stop knowing him even when she wanted to. I understand if you've already decided. I need you to know that I made a mistake, not the one you think, a different one. I should have told you things I chose to protect you from instead. I was wrong. The divorce filing reached me this morning. Davina, please. I will not contact you again after this if you don't want me to, but I need you to know that whatever you believe I was doing in that room, you are wrong. And I need to tell you why. After that, if you still want to leave, I will not stop you. She sat with that last one for a long time. She was an architect. She had been trained to look at structures and find where the load was really being carried, where the stress was actually distributed, what the building was doing beneath what it appeared to do. She kept coming back to Park Soo-yeon's face. Not guilt, grief. Brief and specific and immediately suppressed. The face of someone who had anticipated this moment and had not found a way to prevent it. She typed, Friday, noon. The coffee shop on Dosandero. Not the penthouse, not anywhere with your people. His response came in 40 seconds. Friday, noon. I'll be there. She arrived at the coffee shop on Dosandero at 11:55 and chose a table against the back wall with sightlines to both the door and the street. Because 3 years of being adjacent to Han Seo-jun's world had made her unconsciously adopt certain habits. He arrived at noon exactly. He always arrived exactly on time. She had never known whether this was courtesy or control, and had eventually decided it was both. He looked different. She had not seen him in 5 days, which was the longest they had been in separate spaces since the marriage. And in 5 days, something had altered that she couldn't immediately categorize. He was still immaculate. The suit, the posture, the way he moved through a space like he had assessed it before entering. But there were shadows under his eyes that she had never seen before, and his face had a quality of effort, like stillness that was costing him more than usual. He sat down across from her. She said, "Talk." He looked at her hands, flat on the table, then at her face. He said, "Park Soo-yeon is not my mistress. She has never been my mistress. She was my informant." Davina waited. "There is a shareholder faction," he said, "within Han Group, my grandfather's brother's family, the Dijon branch. They have been, for the past 3 years, building a case for a board takeover. Not a hostile acquisition, a disqualification on grounds of personal conduct." He paused. "They have been manufacturing evidence, creating a narrative. They hired Park Soo-yeon, who was genuinely an acquisition strategist. I did not plant her. They hired her to document what they hoped would be a real affair. When she found out what she was being used for, she came to me." Davina said. "When?" 6 months ago." The coffee shop was quiet. She heard her own breathing. 6 months, she said. "I was managing it," he said. "I thought I could contain it without involving you. Without making it..." He stopped. Tried again. "The agreement between us had a specific character, Davina. You did not sign up for my family's political machinations. I did not think it was..." Another stop, and she saw something move across his face. Something that was not the controlled expression she was used to. "I did not think it was fair to bring the danger of my position into what we had agreed to." "What we had agreed to," she repeated. Something shifted in his expression. "What we had agreed to," he said quietly, "is not what it was. For a long time, not for me." The silence between them changed. She had trained herself 5 days of deliberate self-construction not to want things from this man. She had been remarkably successful at it for approximately 30 seconds of sitting across from him, and now the construction was showing its weak points. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes. You let me believe..." "I know." His voice was low and precise and completely without defense. "I know what I let you believe. I let you walk into that corridor because I ran out of time. Because I had spent 3 days trying to find a way to tell you about the situation without..." He stopped. "Without telling you other things that I was less certain were mine to tell you." She looked at him. What other things? He met her eyes across the table, and for the first time in 3 years, possibly for the first time ever, in her experience of him, Han Seo-jun looked at her without any of the armor. Not a performance of honesty, not the controlled version of himself that he presented even in private moments. Just him. Whatever was underneath all the architecture he'd built. That I am not in an arrangement anymore, he said, and I haven't been for a very long time. Her chest did something complicated and involuntary. I don't know, she said slowly, carefully, if I can trust that. I know, he said. I know I've given you very little reason to. You gave me nothing, she said. For 3 years. You gave me nothing. Yes. He didn't look him away. He paused, and she had the strange, vertiginous feeling of watching someone choose accuracy over self-protection. I was afraid of what it meant if it became real. I had structured my entire adult life around not being at the mercy of anything I couldn't control. And you, he stopped again. I what? She said. He looked at her. You walked into that boardroom and I couldn't read the room for 40 seconds, he said. That has never happened to me. A beat. I chose the arrangement because I could control an arrangement. I could not control. He made a small gesture toward the space between them. She sat with that. Outside, Sol moved past the window, relentless and indifferent, paying no attention to the 2 people at the back table of a coffee shop on Dos Sandero, who were, very carefully, beginning to tell each other the truth for the first time. The Thursday meetings, she said, with Soo-yeon. Strategy meetings, he said. We were building a counter case. She was feeding false information back to the Daejeon branch. It was, he paused, more complicated than it should have been, because they have someone inside our legal team. Someone I hadn't identified yet. They have someone inside. She stopped, reassessed. This is bigger than a board dispute. Yes? His voice was flat and careful. I was trying to resolve it quietly, without dragging you in. I'm already in, she said. I've been in for 3 years. I just wasn't told. He looked at her with something that might, on another face, have been called pain. I know, he said. I was wrong. She looked at her hands on the table. She thought about 5 days of hotel beds, and Jisoo's careful questions, and the particular loneliness of being the only person in a room who knows exactly how thoroughly they've rearranged themselves around someone else. She thought about the divorce filing sitting on Marcus's desk. She thought about what Seo-jun's face had looked like in that corridor. The person in your legal team, she said. Have you identified them? A pause. He looked at her like he was recalibrating. Not yet, he said. What evidence does the Daejeon branch have? What does the manufactured narrative actually consist of? He was very still. Why? She looked at him directly. Because I'm an architectural intelligence, Seo-jun. I look at structures, and I find where they fail. If someone has been building a case against you for 3 years, I want to see what they've built. Something moved in his eyes. Something she recognized from the boardroom 3 years ago. That quick, unguarded thing, gone too fast to name. Davina, he said. I haven't filed the divorce, she said. Not yet. Marcus has the paperwork, but I haven't signed the final authorization. She looked at him steadily. I'm not saying I'm staying. I'm saying I'm not ready to leave until I understand what I'm actually leaving. He held her gaze for a long moment. Okay, he said. Show me everything, she said. Whatever they've built, whatever Soo-yeon gave you, I want to see the structure. It could be dangerous, he said, if they know you're involved. I'm already on record as your wife, she said. I'm already involved. The question is whether I'm involved with access to information or without it. She raised an eyebrow. Given that operating without information led me to a hotel corridor 5 days ago, I think we can agree my current approach isn't working. For the first time in 5 days, possibly much longer, something crossed his face that was almost something like the beginning of a smile. It didn't arrive, but its approach was visible. Come to the office tonight, he said. I'll show you everything. She nodded. She gathered her coat and stood, and he stood when she stood. because he always stood when she stood, even though it wasn't strictly necessary. One of those small courtesies she'd stopped noticing 3 years ago and was noticing now with inconvenient acuity. "Seo-jun," she said. He waited. "When this is over," she said, "and whatever the Daejeon branch has built is dismantled, we are going to have a different conversation. About the arrangement, about what it actually is now or isn't. You understand?" "Yes," he said. Not hedging, not qualifying, just yes. She left the coffee shop. She stood in the autumn air on Dosandero and felt the particular vertigo of a woman who has changed the direction she's walking without yet knowing where she's going. Her phone buzzed. "Thank you," he had written, "for coming." She looked at it for a moment. Then she put it in her pocket and walked toward the subway, already reorganizing what she knew, already beginning to see the structure of what had been built against him. The load-bearing points, the stress fractures, the place where it would fail if you found the right pressure. She was very good at finding those. The Han Group Tower at night was different from the Han Group Tower during business hours, which she knew because she had designed significant portions of it and had walked it at every hour. At 11 in the evening, the 44th floor, his floor, was quiet in the particular way of power that doesn't need witnesses, and Seo-jun met her at the elevator in shirt sleeves with his jacket gone and his tie loosened and 3 folders on the conference table behind him that looked like they'd been assembled with the focused fury of a man who had been working without stopping for 5 days. He had been working without stopping for 5 days. She knew this because she knew him. "Sit," he said. "Please." She sat. For the next 3 hours, Han Seo-jun showed her everything. The Daejeon branch's play was elegant, in a cold and ruthless way that she could appreciate structurally, even as she found it repellent. 3 years of groundwork. Manufactured correspondence between Seo-jun and shell companies that, at surface reading, suggested financial misconduct. Fabricated testimony from 2 former employees, both of whom had left Han Group under circumstances that made them credible grievance holders. And the personal conduct element, the hotel bookings under Park Soo-yeon's name, designed to be discovered, designed to look like exactly what Davina had believed them to look like. "They wanted you to leave," she said. He looked up from the folder. "What?" "They wanted me to leave," she said. "A wife who walks out is more useful to them than a wife who stays. She's evidence of a troubled personal life. She's a potential source of testimony. She creates a narrative of instability." She looked at him. "They were using your marriage to me as part of the structure. The affair evidence was meant to be found." He was very still. "I should have seen it," he said. "You were too close to it," she said. "You were managing it, which means you were inside it. I'm looking at it fresh." She turned the folder. "Who built this?" "This isn't the Daejeon family directly. They don't have this kind of operational sophistication. Someone designed this for them." He reached for a separate file. "We think it's a consulting firm. Han Jung-woo, my grandfather's brother's eldest, made contact approximately 4 years ago with a crisis management company that operates on the wrong side of the line. Name? Publicly, Meridian Strategic Consulting." She stopped. She looked at him. "Meridian," she said. "Yes, I know," he said. "It's the name of the London building you—" "No." She shook her head. "I know that firm. I turned down a contract with them 2 years before I came to Seoul. They approached Kingsley Group for branding work, and I did due diligence on them and found 2 subsidiaries that were registered in jurisdictions I didn't like." She met his eyes. "I have files on them, my own files, because when I turn something down, I document why." This time, the thing that crossed his face had a name. She recognized it, because she'd seen it on her own face in mirrors, in moments when something aligned that she'd been trying to align for a long time. There she is. "You have files," he said slowly. "In my office, London server-backed, nothing to do with Han Group systems, nothing they could have touched." She held his gaze. "I have financial registration records Subsidiary mapping, 2 names of principal consultants. If those names connect to whoever they sent to build your case, it breaks the chain of deniability, he said. The Dijon branch can argue they hired a legitimate firm. But if the firm has documented criminal methodology, they can't argue anything, she said. The whole structure fails. The 44th floor was very quiet. Outside, Seoul glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, unconcerned and enormous. Seo-jun looked at her across the conference table with 3 years of wasted distance between them and the specific, arrested expression of a man who had spent 3 years telling himself an arrangement was an arrangement and was rapidly running out of places to put that story. "Davina," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. "I need to say it. I know what you need to say." She held his gaze. "And you're going to say it. But not tonight. Tonight we work. When this is over, when the structure is dismantled and there's no danger in it." She paused. "Then we talk about the other thing." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate, the nod of a man making a promise with his whole body. "When this is over," he said. She reached for the Meridian folder. "Tell me everything you have on Meridian's principal contacts," she said. "Then I'll access my London files and we'll see where they connect." He pulled his chair around to her side of the table. The first time in 3 years he had chosen to sit beside her rather than across from her, and opened his laptop, and she pulled up the remote access to her London archive, and they began to work. She was very aware of how close he was. She was very aware of the precise warmth of him, the sound of his breathing, the way his hand moved when he pointed to something on a screen, the specific, contained energy of a man who was not touching her and was very aware of not touching her. She kept working. She was, she thought, in a catastrophic amount of trouble. By 2 in the morning, they had the connection. It was a name, Kim Byung-chul, listed as a silent director on one of Meridian Strategic's offshore subsidiaries in her London file, appearing again as a registered consultant on the crisis management contract the Daejeon branch had used to build the fabricated misconduct documentation. The chain was there, Meridian to Kim Byung-chul, to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, to a legal research firm that had produced the forged correspondence attributed to Seo-jun. "That's the thread," Davina said. "That's the load-bearing point. Pull Kim Byung-chul and the whole structure comes down." Seo-jun was very still beside her, studying the screen. "Kim Byung-chul is not a nobody," he said slowly. "He has political connections. Provincial council level. If we go at him directly..." "We don't go at him directly," she said. "You don't. He's expecting you to come at him through Han Group channels, which is why he's positioned the documentation through subsidiaries you can't touch without implicating your own legal team." "But my documentation," she gestured at the screen, "came from an independent due diligence review filed 2 years before I had any connection to Han Group. It's in a London solicitor's archive with a timestamp that predates your marriage. He has no play against it." Seo-jun turned and looked at her. The conference room was quiet, and the city was dark outside, and they were very close together. The way proximity happens when 2 people have been working on the same problem for 3 hours and have stopped managing the space between them. "You understand," he said, "that when we go to the board with this, the Daejeon branch becomes the story," she said. "Not you. They will retaliate." His voice was flat and careful. "Not through the board. Through other means." She met his eyes. "What kind of other means?" He held her gaze for a moment. Something moved in his expression. The particular tension of a man deciding how much to give someone who has already given him more than he expected. "Han Jung-woo," he said, "has twice in the past decade used leverage of a non-legal kind against people who stood between him and what he wanted. One of them left Korea. The other," he paused, "stopped being an obstacle through circumstances that were never fully explained." The room was very quiet. "You're telling me he's dangerous," she said. "I'm telling you that going forward means he knows you're involved, actively, instrumentally." He held her gaze. He already has documentation of your life as my wife, public appearances, shared addresses. If he believes you've helped dismantle 3 years of his work, he may decide that reaching you is a faster route to pressure than reaching me. She sat with that. You're trying to protect me, she said. Again? Yes, he said, without apology. Jun. She turned in her chair to face him directly, and he turned to face her, and the conference table was behind them now, and there was nothing between them. I am a 39-year-old woman, 29, 39 in stubbornness years, which is what counts. Something moved in his face, startled, and then almost becoming that almost smile again. I walked into this with incomplete information. I am not walking out with incomplete information. You cannot keep protecting me from your world when I'm already living in it. She held his gaze. Tell me what the actual threat level is. All of it. And then we plan accordingly. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her. It was worse than she'd assumed, and less catastrophic than her worst model, which was, she supposed, the nature of most things. Han Jong-woo had surveillance infrastructure, had people in 3 of the building's service staff roles, had likely been monitoring communication on Han Group servers for the past 18 months. He would move fast when he realized his documentation was compromised, because a slow Han Jong-woo was a careful Han Jong-woo, and a careful Han Jong-woo was harder to catch. We need to move faster than he does, she said. Yes. How long to get the Kim Byung-chul documentation to the board in a way that can't be intercepted? If we use outside legal counsel, not the compromised internal team, 48 hours, possibly 36. Who's your outside counsel? For something this sensitive, I would use... He stopped, looked at her. Your lawyer, Marcus Osi. He's handled international corporate litigation in Korea before. He's not in my network, which means he's not in Jong-woo's network. You would need to authorize the engagement. She reached for her phone. It was 2:17 in the morning in Seoul, which made it 8:17 in the evening in London. Marcus picks up, she said. At any hour when I call. She dialed. Marcus picked up on the second ring. Davina, he said. I'm assuming this is about the filing? Hold the filing, she said, and I need you to fly to Seoul. A pause. Then Marcus, with the tone of a man who had genuinely heard everything, I'll be on the morning flight. She should have gone back to the Signal. She was aware of this. She was aware of every reasonable, self-protective reason to take a car to the hotel, to put physical distance between herself and the man who had, even with the best possible intentions, even with explanations that she largely believed, kept her at arm's length for 3 years, and was now looking at her from 3 feet away, like she was something he'd been afraid to want. She did not go back to the Signal. She fell asleep on the conference room couch at 3:15, in her coat, with 3 folders on the table and Seo-jun working quietly at the table beside her. And she woke at 7 to the sound of him on a call, low voice, rapid Korean, the particular clipped efficiency of someone managing a crisis, and gray Seoul, morning coming through the windows, and the specific, strange peace of knowing exactly where she was and not wanting to be anywhere else. She sat up. He glanced at her from across the room and held up one finger. 1 minute and finished the call. Park Soo-yeon is out of Seoul, he said when he hung up. She left last night. She sent me a message this morning. Jung-woo has discovered that she's been feeding false information. She was contacted by someone she believes is working for him. His voice was careful and controlled, and she could see the effort it was costing him. She's safe. She got out, but it means the timeline just compressed, Davina said. Yes? She was already standing, smoothing her coat, reaching for the folders. Call your driver. We need Marcus's documents from London. He'll have emailed the preliminary framework this morning. And we need to find whoever Jong-woo put in your legal team before they know we know they're there. He stood. He was looking at her with that expression again, the unguarded one, the one that cost him something. Davina, he said, Seojun, I know, he said. When it's over, I know. He paused. He stopped. Tried again. You slept on my conference room couch to help me dismantle a 3-year conspiracy built against me by my own family. He held her gaze. I don't have words for what that is. She looked at him. She said, then use actions. We have 36 hours. Let's go. The 36 hours were not clean. She had not expected them to be. She had designed enough buildings to know that when structures were under the kind of stress they were applying to Jungwoo's network, the failure was rarely elegant. Things broke unevenly. There were secondary failures you didn't anticipate, load transferring in unexpected directions. The compromised lawyer in Seo-jun's legal team turned out to be not a lawyer, but a paralegal, a young woman named Choi Ara, who had been recruited 18 months ago when Jungwoo's people had found the leverage of her brother's debt. Seo-jun found out through a combination of his security team's access review and a detail Davina spotted in the communication metadata. A specific pattern of after-hours file access on the acquisitions documents that matched the nights before each of Jungwoo's strategic moves. He handled it with the precise, controlled devastation of someone who never made emotional decisions and was furious beneath the control. He did not destroy Choi Ara. He had the debt resolved, quietly, through a subsidiary, and transferred her to a role outside the information chain and said nothing. When Davina asked, he said, she was coerced. I'm not interested in punishing people for being vulnerable to coercion. She had looked at him and felt something move in her chest that was not new, but was newly available to acknowledge. Marcus arrived from London at noon and spent 6 hours reviewing the Kim Byung-chul chain with a focused intensity that made Davina proud of her choice in lawyers. And at 9 in the evening, he sat back and said, this is clean. If you file this with the FSC and simultaneously present to the Han Group independent directors, the ones outside the Daejeon influence, you have what you need to make this unambiguous. When do we file? Seo-jun asked. 6 tomorrow morning, Marcus said. Before markets open. Before Jungwoo can react. Seo-jun looked at Davina. She nodded. 6 tomorrow morning, he said. What Jungwoo did that night was not sophisticated, and this told Davina something about how rattled he was. Rattled people abandoned elegant strategies and reached for crude leverage, and Han Jungwoo reached for the crudest available. A phone call to Davina's cell at 11:15 in the evening, from a number she didn't recognize, with a voice she'd never heard that was careful and pleasant in the way that threats delivered with complete confidence sometimes are. Ms. Kingsley, the voice said, or Mrs. Han, I suppose, for the time being. I want to have a conversation about the choices you've made this week. She was in Seo-jun's penthouse. They had moved there from the office at 8. Security team's recommendation, easier to control the perimeter. She was sitting at the kitchen counter with a cup of tea that had gone cold, and Seo-jun was in the adjacent living room on a call with the independent board directors, and she looked at his back and made a decision. She said, who is this? Someone who is offering you an opportunity, the voice said. File the divorce? Leave. Sole in the next 24 hours. Waive the evidence your lawyer has been reviewing. Do these things, and your professional reputation remains entirely intact. The Kingsley Group's Singapore contracts remain viable. Your career continues. She looked at Seo-jun's back, at the line of his shoulders, the way he stood even in his own home with the posture of a man who had learned early to take up exactly the space he needed and no more. And if I don't, she said. There are narratives available, the voice said, about a British architect who leveraged a strategic marriage to secure international contracts she wouldn't otherwise have qualified for. These narratives can be made credible. Your firm's reputation in Asian markets specifically could face complications. She was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? She said. A pause. Of course. Did you actually look at the Meridian documentation before you called me? She said. Because if you had, you would know that we filed the Kim Byung-chul chain with the FSC at 8:15 this evening, not tomorrow morning. Marcus moved the timeline when Soo-yeon's warning came through. She paused. You're calling me because you're already too late. You're hoping I'm the weak point. I'm not. Silence on the other end. Have a good evening, she said, and hung up. She set the phone down on the counter. Her hands were perfectly steady. She noted distantly, not afraid, or not only afraid, she was also deeply, cleanly angry. The kind of anger that sharpens rather than blurs. And she was running the next 48 hours in her head like a blueprint, looking for the failure points. Seo-jun appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at him. He called me, she said. Han Jung-woo, or someone working for him. We moved the timeline correctly. The FSC filing is already in. He was very still. What did he say to you? Threats. Professional reputation. An invitation to leave. She looked at him, steadily. I declined. Something moved through his face in sequence. Fury, controlled almost immediately. And then something else underneath it that wasn't anger at all. Are you all right? He asked. I'm fine. She picked up the cold tea. He chose the wrong leverage point. He thought that because I have something to protect professionally, I could be scared away from something professionally dangerous. But I've been building things in difficult ground for 12 years. She met his eyes. I don't scare easily. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and she had exactly a second's warning. The particular movement of someone who has stopped calculating. Before his hands were on her face, and he was looking at her from a distance that was not a distance at all, and she could feel the slight tremor in him, the thing that happened to very controlled people when the control reached its limit. Seo-jun? She said. I know, he said, when it's over. His voice was rough and precise. But I need to... He stopped. His thumbs were at her jaw, her face cupped in his hands, and he was looking at her with the full weight of 3 years, and whatever he'd been carrying underneath them. I need you to know. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever happens with the board, I need you to know that none of this was about the arrangement. Not anymore. Not for a long time. She looked at him. You pushed me away, she said, for 1.5 years. After She stopped. After you stopped treating it like an arrangement, he said. Yes. You knew, she said. Yes. And you still... I was terrified, he said. It came out with the quality of something that had cost him to admit, completely without his usual precision, just the fact of it, raw and unpolished. There has never been anything I couldn't manage the terms of. And you... He looked at her. You are not manageable. What I felt was not manageable. And I spent 18 months choosing the thing I knew how to do, which was protect, which was maintain distance over the thing I didn't know how to do. He held her gaze. Which was this. The kitchen was very quiet. You're an idiot, she said. Something broke in his expression. Not in a terrible way. In the way that things break when they've been held under too much pressure for too long, and the release is almost relief. Yes, he said, I am. You had me convinced for 1 year, she said, that I was feeling something completely one-sided, that I had made the catastrophic mistake of developing feelings in an arrangement specifically designed to prevent feelings, Davina. And you knew, and you just... I know, he said. I know. His hands were still on her face. I was wrong. I am wrong about this, about how I handled it, everything. I know. She looked at him. She thought about the soup he had made from scratch when she had a fever. The 45 seconds in the hallway, his hand at her back in rooms full of people. Don't go. She thought about the corridor of the Grand Hyatt and the expression on his face and the sound of her name in his voice, both of which she had been running from all week and both of which she was done running from. If you keep me at a distance again, she said, if you decide, for any reason, danger, protection, managing outcomes, that you know better than me what I can handle, and you act on that instead of trusting me. I won't, he said. I'm serious. Davina. His voice was very low and very sure. I spent 3 years protecting you from things by keeping you outside of them, and I watched you walk away at the end of it. I understand what that model produces. He held her gaze. I will not do it again. She looked at him for a long time. Then she closed the remaining distance because she had been the one with more courage in this marriage from the beginning, and she was not, apparently, going to stop now. And she kissed him. And Han Seo-jun, who was controlled and precise and armored against everything, made a sound against her mouth that was none of those things. A sound that was 3 years of distance finally collapsed, and his arms came around her with the specific, desperate care of someone who had been holding something at arm's length for so long that finally holding it close was almost more than they knew what to do with. The city was dark outside the penthouse windows. The FSC filing was already in. Marcus was in a hotel 6 blocks away with the complete documentation chain. In the morning, things would happen that would determine the next phase of everything. Tonight, the kitchen was warm and the distance was gone, and Davina was in his arms. Finally, at last. The scene fades. The board meeting was not anticlimactic exactly, but it was less dramatic than the architecture of the preceding week had suggested it might be. This was often how it went with load-bearing failures. You found the thread, you pulled it, the structure came. Down not with a crash, but with the specific, unstoppable logic of something that had already failed before you touched it. Marcus presented the Kim Byung-chul chain. The independent directors reviewed it with the focused attention of people who had been waiting for exactly this kind of documentation without knowing they were waiting. Seo-jun presented the fabricated correspondence, the shell company chain, the full scope of what the Daeshun branch had constructed over 3 years. Han Jong-woo, who was present at his own grandfather's insistence, said nothing for the duration of the presentation. He was 61 and had the particular stillness of someone calculating distances. And Davina, who sat along the side wall because she had insisted on being there, and Seo-jun had not argued this time, watched his face and saw the exact moment he calculated that the distance was too great. The investigation was opened at 11:45 in the morning. The FSC moved with the efficiency of regulators who had been given clean, specific, well-documented evidence and did not need to excavate further before acting. Han Jong-woo was escorted from the building by his own legal team, who were at this point more focused on managing their own exposure than protecting their client. It was, Seo-jun's grandfather said afterward, sitting with them in his study at the Gyeonggi-do estate with tea that tasted of ceremony and satisfaction in approximately equal measure. Exactly what happens when you underestimate the people your grandson chooses to trust. He looked at Davina when he said it. She met his eyes. Mr. Han, she said, you are not what I expected, he said, when I gave them the year. What did you expect? Something decorative, he said, with the complete honesty of a 78-year-old man who had survived long enough to dispense with flattery. Something that would make the house look occupied. He looked at her with the assessing eyes she'd learned, over 3 years, to meet directly. I was wrong. You were, she said pleasantly. Something moved in his face that she thought might be the same almost smile she'd seen in his grandson. The week after the board meeting, she went back to the penthouse. Not because she was done sorting through what had happened, she was not done. And she was honest with herself about this. And she suspected that Seo-jun was not done either. 3 years of a particular kind of structure didn't dismantle in a week. There were conversations still to have, things still to say in the clear light of no longer crisis that had only been possible to approximate in the middle of one. But she went back because the signal was very expensive and Jisoo needed her couch back, and because the penthouse was, she had accepted this with the resigned clarity of someone who has stopped negotiating with themselves. Home. He was there when she arrived. He took her bag. He did not make a production of it. The Busan project. Called, he said. They want to move the site visit to next week. I know, she said. I rescheduled. They stood in the foyer with the bag between them and 3 years of revision in the air. And she thought, we are going to have to figure out how to be different people in the same space. And this is going to require work, and I am not afraid of work. I'd like to see the Busan site, he said, if you'd want company. She looked at him. He was not asking the way he used to ask things, through assistance and implication and careful distance. He was just asking. Yes, she said. I'd want company. He nodded. Then, I spoke to my lawyer about the divorce filing. She waited. I asked him to file a counter document, he said, withdrawing consent on my end, which means it can't proceed without mediation. He held her gaze. I know you have your own legal team, and Marcus can probably counter it. I'm not trying to trap you. He paused. I'm asking for time to do this. Right. To be, he stopped, reorganizing. To be what I should have been willing to be 3 years ago. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about Marcus's filing on his desk. She thought about the exit clauses. She thought about the version of herself that had packed a single bag and walked out of this apartment a week and a half ago. And she thought about the version that had kissed him in the kitchen at midnight and not regretted it. I want a real marriage, she said. Not an arrangement, not a contract. A real marriage with all of what that means. Communication, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. No more protecting me from things by keeping me outside of them. Yes, he said. I want to keep the Busan project, she said, and whatever comes after it. I'm not disappearing into your world. I have my own. I know, he said. I'd never ask you to. And, she said, I want the soup recipe from when I had the fever. Because that soup was extraordinary, and I want it on the record that I know you can cook. Something happened to his face. It arrived this time, the smile, full and a little helpless, and nothing like the controlled expression she'd been presented with for 3 years. And she felt it like a key turning in something she'd thought was permanently locked. The soup recipe, he said. Non-negotiable. He stepped forward, and she let him come close, and when his arms came around her, this time, it was different from the kitchen. Less desperate, less the relief of finally, more the particular warmth of something settling into its right place. And she pressed her face against his shoulder and felt his hand move to her hair, careful and certain. I love you, he said, into the top of her head. Not qualified, not managed, just the fact of it. She closed her eyes. I know, she said. I've known for a while. It was very inconvenient. She felt him exhale, something long and releasing, and his arms tightened slightly. Yes, he said. It was. I love you too, she said. For the record, in case the past 2 weeks were ambiguous. They were not ambiguous, he said. You filed divorce papers and then personally dismantled a criminal conspiracy on my behalf. The feeling was clear. She laughed. It came out real and warm and slightly surprised by itself, the way her laughs always did when she stopped managing them. He pressed his face to her hair. She thought, I am in an enormous amount of trouble, and it is exactly where I want to be. 4 months later. The Busan Cultural Center broke ground on a Thursday in late January under a sky that was the particular pale blue of Korean winter, clean and cold and edged with a light that was different here than anywhere else she'd worked, coastal in a way that changed what the building would need to be. She stood at the edge of the site in her work coat and her site boots, watching the preliminary survey team, and Seojun stood beside her in a coat that was slightly too fine for a construction site and was getting dust on it, which he appeared not to care about. The acoustic panels on the east face, he said. You moved them. I moved them 12 degrees, she said. The light does something different here than I'd modeled for. The angle changes how the sound disperses through the atrium. He looked at the preliminary ground markings. It'll change the shadow pattern on the north facade. I know, I want it to. She glanced at him. You've been looking at the updated drawings. I look at everything you send me, he said. simple and unapologetic. She looked back at the site. I want this to be the building that does what I've been trying to figure out since the Meridian Tower, she said. That thing where the light and the sound and the space, where they do something together that makes people feel fully human inside it. Like the building is a living thing, not just a container. He was quiet for a moment. She was used to his silences now. She'd learned to read them. Which ones were thinking, and which ones were feeling, and which ones were both. It will, he said. Already will be. She looked at him. You don't know that, she said. I know you, he said. I know what you build. She looked back at the site, at the pale winter light on the ground that would eventually become the floor of something extraordinary, and she felt the particular, quiet satisfaction of a woman who has, after a long and circuitous route, arrived somewhere she had not known she was going and found that it is exactly right. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jisoo. Doctor confirmed. 8 weeks. You should probably tell your husband before I do. She looked at the screen for a moment. She looked at Seo-jun, who was watching the survey team with the focused attention he gave everything that interested him. His profile precise against the Busan winter sky. She said, Seo-jun? He turned. She held up her phone. He looked at the bureau screen. She watched his face in the way she had come to love watching his face. The specific sequence of it, control, and then something breaking through the control. And what came through was not managed or measured or at a distance. It was complete. It was the expression of a man for whom something has just become real that has always been desired without daring to be named. He reached for her. She let him. He held her in the middle of the Busan construction site with the winter light coming sideways off the harbor and the survey team diplomatically finding things to look at in other directions. And she pressed her face against his shoulder and thought, all of it. All 3 cold years and the hotel corridor and the conference room floor and the board meeting and everything. All of it was load-bearing. All of it is part of the structure of this. She had always understood buildings. She was understanding now that people could be buildings too, that the strongest ones were the ones tested and not collapsed, built carefully from the bones up with someone who knew how to work with what they found, who stayed in the difficult ground and made something extraordinary from it. She breathed him in. She thought, more than enough, more than I knew to ask for. She thought, mine. And against her hair, quiet and certain and nothing like an arrangement, ours. Thank you for watching K-Mafia Romance Stories, besties. If this story moved you, if you've ever stayed somewhere because some part of you already knew it was home, please like, share, and subscribe. Davina and Seo-jun's story was for you. We'll see you in the next one.